Hello and welcome to the Sandro Forte podcast. Over the many years I've been running a successful business, I've met, directly or indirectly, many successful people from entrepreneurs, sports stars, celebrities, and dare I say, even royalty. So what makes someone successful? Do we even know what success is? And the all-important question, can we create it for ourselves? This podcast series invites a diverse group of people to share their insights, their wisdom, and the things they've learned along the way. Welcome to another Sandro Forte podcast with me, Sandro Forte. Today's guest is Nick Leeson. Nick is a former derivatives broker who worked at the bank Barings, the then oldest merchant bank in London, which, as a result of rogue trader activity and speculative unauthorised moves he made from 1992, suffered over $1 billion of losses and subsequently folded. This resulted in global notoriety for Nick. Sentenced to 6.5 years in Changi prison in Singapore, Nick was released in 1999 having been diagnosed with colon cancer, which he survived despite a very poor prognosis at the time. In prison, Nick wrote a book called Rogue Trader, which was turned subsequently into a film. Since then, he's become a regular after-dinner speaker, a lecturer, and has been involved in various business interests, including Irish football club Galway United FC. And of course, Nick has recently appeared on Celebrity Big Brother, in which he finished 4th. So once again, my guest today, Nick Leeson. Welcome, Nick.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Lots of people are very excited about you being a guest because I know there's lots of questions that for many people remain unanswered. I'm here to clarify a few of those today. So obviously, Nick, you gained notoriety, as many of us know, headline news all that time ago. Would you say that what happened back in the 90s really defined you as a person? Does it still define you today? You must get sick of being asked all the same questions all of the time, but has that experience shaped you, and if so, how?
Well, it definitely shapes you. I mean, I think we are all the sum of our experiences. So there's good experiences and bad experiences within that, and you know, I've certainly had my fair share of both, and there's a lot of bad experiences that were associated with prison as well. So you very quickly have to learn how to deal with certain situations, and the way that I managed to deal with those still sticks with me today. So I don't always think back to my time spent in prison and how I dealt with situations, but it gives you this innate ability that you know you can cope. You can face most things down, because I think from the first day I stepped foot into prison, I didn't know how I was going to survive, but somehow I did. I spent 4.5 years in prison in between Singapore and Germany, and you get by, and it is this innate ability that I genuinely believe that we all have. I also believe that you're only confronted with what you can cope with. Where you find the strength from is very difficult sometimes. It is innate, but it is there. It's in all of us, and the more that we can encourage or work out ways that we bring it to the fore, then people will be able to cope a lot better in their lives. I don't necessarily focus on all the good things. There's plenty of bad things that make me what I am today, but in terms of what happened back in that period, 1995 to 1998, 92 to 95, that period I think will be at the forefront of most people's minds when they think of my name. I think that might have changed a little bit recently with the Celebrity Big Brother thing, so there might be some 18 to 25-year-olds who remember me more for having a tortoise outfit on, running around a house in L Street. But that's fine. It's you are what you are, and none of us can deny history and things that have happened in the past. It's not necessarily a case of embracing it, but it's more of a being aware of what that genuinely means to you and putting that in the right context and using that going forward.
You said something very interesting just now, and I've never heard anyone say this before. You're only confronted with what you can cope with. That's clearly a belief that you have.
Yeah, no, look, I wouldn't have thought I would have been able to cope with any of the things that I did. I mean, prison, the losses at the bank. I was divorced whilst I was in prison, diagnosed with cancer, and somehow, you can find that strength to overcome. It doesn't pop up in front of you. You have to dig deep. But I do genuinely believe that we've all got it in us. And it's whether that comes through some form of visualization. When I was diagnosed with cancer and I was receiving the chemotherapy, I had 6 months of chemotherapy whilst I was in prison in Singapore. So you go through a process where you have 5 days of chemotherapy and then you have 3 weeks off. That was the diagnosis or the structure that I was under. And for the 5 days, it's tough, and you take anti-nausea drugs, and then you get you become addicted to the anti-nausea drugs. So when you're not getting those, you start to feel sick at certain times of the day. It's very, very difficult to eat. So you have to get yourself into a routine. And the one thing that I used to do at that particular time, so this was one of the ways of coping then, was just, and it's a very basic form of visualization, but after I'd had the chemotherapy drugs and intravenously, and I went back to the prison, you could eat in the afternoon. So I'd have the chemotherapy in the morning, and then in the afternoon you wouldn't be able to eat, but in the morning that you could. So everything was very much biased to eating in the morning. But once I'd had the chemotherapy for the 5 days, you could then visualize the fact that it was leaving your body by sweating. So I was in Singapore, so I'd make sure that I was out walking, out running, even in the morning before I'd go and get the chemotherapy again. And it was just I knew that the drug was causing me damage, and that it was making me feel sick. But through that visualization of sweating and trying to pass it through my body quicker, gave me the sense that I was in some form of control, rather than just being, completely at the whim of what was being done to me.
One of the reasons why I was really excited to have you as a guest is not really to explore and go over a lot of old ground, because that's been done to death, but is really to look at what's happened since, really.
Right.
Now, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the fact that you now make a living, don't you, as an after dinner speaker, as a lecturer. What messages, what lessons have you learned that you pass on to people?
I do a lot of after dinner and conferences that I talk at. So I do keynote addresses. For me, I tell stories. So and there's one story that I know better than anybody, and that's the collapse at the bank. And it's a case of looking at yourself and really not necessarily bearing your soul, but when you're in prison and you have time to reflect and self-reflect, you have to take yourself apart. And when you've been in such a negative experience, and I would imagine that there's some similarities with people who suffer some form of addiction. You have to admit what you are and who you are and what you're doing to yourself before you can start to build yourself back up. So that was very much the process that I was in during my time in prison in Singapore. I was keeping notes and writing a diary every day. And you look at things that you've done and the way that you reacted and the way that you were in relationships with certain people. And you come to the conclusion that you don't particularly like yourself. So you have to do something about it. But until you've really gone through that process of completely dismantling yourself, being quite aggressive and really quite unnice about yourself, and you really have got to that stage where you are completely dismantled, then you can start to put yourself back together. But if you don't get that realization, you don't get that accountability, and you don't accept what you are or what you were, I think you struggle then to move forward and rebuild yourself. And a lot of people have a problem with that, and I think it's because there's a couple of different reasons. I think, my self-reflection was a forced self-reflection. I was in prison for 4.5 years. So sometimes when you're in business or you're chasing the dream or chasing the profit of whatever the organisation does that you're running, life is so fast-paced that you don't have time to put your finger on a pause button or on a stop button to really work out whether you're achieving what you want to achieve, or whether you're damaging yourself living your life at the pace that you are. And I remember when I first arrived in prison in Singapore, you know, you're always looking for the slightest positive that makes you feel a little bit better about yourself. And the one I always used to put my finger on was that if I'd continued the way that I was going, you know, 1995 at Bearings, the losses and the stress that the way that I was living my life, lots of alcohol, you know, not eating particularly well, not exercising enough. The conclusion I drew was that I was going to have a heart attack fairly soon, you know, age 28, 29, 30 or whatever it was going to be. You know, little did I know that in a couple of years I was going to be diagnosed with colon cancer, which is also goes back to that period when, you know, my life was out of control. So, you know, it is difficult for a lot of people to just press that pause button and really have a look at themselves. And are you achieving what you want to achieve? Is your health as good as it possibly should be? Are you know, are there any signs that your body's giving you that something could possibly be wrong? And, you know, they were all there and prevalent for me at the time. I was just, you know, as the majority of men do, specifically more so than women, you know, we just ignore what we have a job to provide and a job to make money, and I think people just got caught up too much in that. And, you know, it sounds like it's not a stupid comment, but it's a weird comment in that, you know, being prosecuted and going to prison forced me to do that. And that was an opportunity that it wasn't even an opportunity, it was what I needed at that time.
Yeah. So a couple of things again that you've touched on, which I think are really important, and a lot of people are asking themselves this question all the time, Nick, and that is, number one, you mentioned about the world being fast-paced, more so now than ever before, and the other thing is this kind of weight of expectation. You know, more and more and more younger people are, you know, going to professions and embarking on a road in life that they don't truly passionately believe in. They just feel that that's their lot in life, or it's what's expected of them. Is that, I mean, that's really what you're saying, isn't it? That a lot of people, the weight of expectation, the fact that we don't take time to reflect on where we are in life, that's quite a strong message from what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I mean, at the time I would have had a very exalted opinion of what success was. You know, it was being at the top of the organisation and making the important decisions. And, you know, I think it's as important for people to understand that there's other ways of garnering success. Putting food on the table for your kids to eat is success. You know, so it's just about moderating and understanding what success is in your lifetime and or in your life, and making sure that you don't extend yourself out of that. Whereas mine, you know, for me, I'm a very very much an alpha type personality, or type A personality as well. And, you know, for me, there was only one place, and that was the top. And, you know, a few rungs below the top would have been, would have probably served me a little bit better. I didn't step on people to get where I wanted to be, because that's not what I'm about. You know, for a short period of my business career, I was very good at my job, and I progressed as a result of that. But just, you know, we need checks and balances in our life as well. You know, you have to work out what your goals are, what you want to achieve, and then make sure that within that as well, your health is being looked after, and that your relationships are working the way that you want to do. And it's almost as if you want to tick a few things off from time to time to make sure that you're going in the right direction, because it is easy to get to veer off in the wrong direction, and that's where that check and balance needs to come in, and you need to get pushed back into line, as you do within an organisation. You know, it's exactly the same sort of thing.
So it would be fair to say, Nick, that, you know, going back all those years, to use a phrase, stripped bare, you know, divorce, health out of control, you know, financially the complete opposite of where you've been previously, extreme poor health. I mean, diagnosis of colon cancer doesn't get much worse than that. No. So you're facing mortality head on. Do you think, let's just use the word punishment, because a lot of people will say, well, he deserved it. But other people will say, do you believe that people should go on being punished? Does that name follow you around? You strike me as, if you don't mind me saying, a very humble, down-to-earth guy. Has that changed a lot? Do you think that people should be continually punished? Was 4.5 years in prison enough for you, and let's draw a line and move on, and have you changed as a result? It's a kind of 3 or 4 questions in one. But
yeah, I view everything that happened to me as part of the punishment, and I've got broad shoulders and I'm willing to accept that. So the time spent in prison, the difficulties that you first have when you come out of prison, the cancer, the divorce, and anything else that happened during that period, because we're probably forgetting something, but I can't think what it is. But all of that is part of the punishment, and there are consequences to actions, right? So, and I explain this to my kids all of the time. If you decide to take a particular course of action, make sure that you understand what the consequences are before you do it. And so that's one of the one of the metrics by which I live my life. So it's not a case of doing something and then thinking about it afterwards. I'll always think about it at the beginning in terms of what the ramifications of that action may be, more so than I did previously during my time at Barings. So that's one of the things to come out of it. You then go through a period of being apologetic, showing remorse, and it's impossible to work out what the right amount of remorse is. I am contrite, I am sorry for everything that happened, and I've definitely been through that period of remorse. But you kind of have to make a decision at some point where, and nobody can tell you where this is. You don't stand in front of a judge and he says, I sentence you to 6.5 years in prison and then 10 years of remorse. He doesn't do that. So, it's a very personal thing in terms of trying to work out what that amount of remorse is. So I've been, I was released from prison in 1999. So 19 years ago, I'm very active on the after dinner and conference circuit. But I get requested to go to those events rather than me putting myself out there or trying to position that I'm available. So it's on request. So and I'm comfortable with that because it means that people specifically want me to attend their events and talk to them. So when I came to the stage where I'm doing Celebrity Big Brother, it was a real challenge for me because you've gone through all of this process of self-reflection and changing, and behaviour exists on a continuum. My behaviours aren't madly different from when they were when I was working in the bank, but there's a good end of the spectrum and there's a bad end of the spectrum, and hopefully I'm a little bit closer to the good end, or nearer to the good end than I am the bad end. There was a lot of bad end behaviour during that particular time. So in doing Celebrity Big Brother, it was kind of, I've gone through this rebuilding process. It's 23 years since the collapse of the bank and things that went wrong there. It's 19 years since I was let out of prison, and this is me, so how is that going to be accepted? And we all use social media these days, and you probably use it a damn sight better than I do because I'm still trying to catch up. But the response on social media has been overwhelmingly positive. So, that's fantastic because that was the gamble for me, and it was a big gamble, because if people didn't like me after I made these adjustments, that's not a ringing endorsement of what I've tried to achieve over that period. So I think what you got on Celebrity Big Brother was the real me. When you go back to the collapse of Barings Bank between 92 and 95, there was a lot of reporting at the time that was, or in the 95 period, that was, sensational. It's all about the stereotypical life of a trader, the Porsches, the penthouse, the yachts, none of which I had. I took a pay cut to go to Singapore. I am very down to earth. I'm, humble. I don't know. It's not a word that you normally associate with yourself. It's lovely when other people say it to you, but it's not a name, not a word that I would immediately use myself to describe describe me. But I'm glad it comes across that way, because what you see is what you get. And my talks are very candid. They're honest. They're self-deprecating. And there's no other way for it to be, because, when you look back at that period, it is definitely the most embarrassing period of my life. Unfortunately, it'll be one that I'll be remembered for in most people's eyes. But maybe that's changed a little bit over the last few weeks and months. That's not really what my target is either. It was more a case of, this is me type thing. And I think the endorsements and the positive response for me is endorsing something that I knew anyway. In 95 to 98, I was still a nice guy, but my behaviours got out of control for a period of time. But I'm not that fundamentally different than at the core than I was during that period. Very loyal, always looking for opportunities, hardworking, diligent, accurate. Those things are still very much true today as they were during that period. But there were a few things that went wrong, undoubtedly.
So going back to the mid-90s, going back to the financial crisis of 08, 09, without being too provocative about this, do you think, in your experience, Nick, that the same mistakes are being made in the corporate world, particularly in the world of finance, for example? Do you see that human behaviour repeating itself? Because isn't that an inevitable part of human behaviour?
Unfortunately so, and it is. Behaviour is what it's all about. Conduct, culture, whatever words you want to associate with it. But at the core of any issue or any problem within business, or certainly within the financial markets, are people. And it's important that you challenge people. It's important that you, at the same time as you're challenging them, that you make sure that you support them. You create an environment where their voice is heard, which is very difficult in financial markets. People tend not to hear below a certain level within the organisation. There's lots of different schools of thought. There's one which is called intent-based leadership at the moment, which I think is particularly valid, and would correctly characterise everything that was wrong at Barings at that particular time. But people get complacent. For me, that's part of what it comes down to. When things are good and it's easy to make money, or people are making money and they're running along with their lives in that helter-skelter fashion, you forget something, and that's usually when the problem arrives. And I think the financial markets are monitored and controlled, infinitely better than they were in the 92 to 95 period, because there's better caliber people involved in them. There's more focus on risk management and compliance and things like that. Is there potential for disaster? Absolutely, because people take their finger off the pulse and they're not proactive enough about what's going on within their organisations. And you can go, and I do visit banks, and you look at some of the controls and procedures that they have in place, and they're the same now as they were 5 years ago. That's a good sign that somebody's already circumventing those rules, because they've been in place for too long. So banks need to be proactive and make sure that the environment is as safe as possible. I mean, bankers, it's a trust industry, right? You need the trust of your customers, and if ultimately the customers don't trust you, then the industry is going to have problems, and that's why it needs to be as safe as it possibly can be.
I hear the word stop, check back. Yeah. So what you said earlier, Nick, is very closely linked to what you're now talking about in terms of the corporate world, that sometimes we just need to pause, reflect, look at where we are. That's your message, right? Yeah,
well, I think in big business and in organisations, you have a lot of near misses, right? And people, when you have a near miss, be that from a trading perspective or be it from something that's gone wrong within your organisation, whatever your organisation may be, go back and examine why that was a near miss and what were the controls and procedures that should have been put into place. So reflection in everything that you do. These things happen for reasons, and they are a forewarner of something that may be going wrong within the organisation.
And you're being asked, going back to what you said earlier, you're being asked to speak after dinner and at corporate events. Rather than you approaching them, which is kind of enlightening, really, because I suppose that everyone sees, and we're already getting an insight into this today, a lot of people see the very valuable messages that you can bring to an event or to a group of individuals.
Yeah, I suppose whenever I do an event, regardless of who the sponsor for the event is, I don't try to promote what they're trying to do. I think the story does that as of right, and people then can take the story and rework it back into what they want to generate from the story, but or from their own event. Or the products that they're selling. It's a really interesting story. It's funny in part. It's got some really important messages. It's got a lot of personal messages in terms of things that you can do yourself. And you do get people who ask you advice, and you try to give the best advice that you possibly can. Whether it's completely meaningful in the context of their own business life, you often question. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm a storyteller, but the story happened, right? It's real life. It does happen, and people do get complacent. And there are lots of different messages that you can bring back into that story that can be of benefit both to individuals and to business. I spoke an event at the Barbican in the city not so long ago now, and it was for a group of treasurers. And somebody there at the end of the meeting came over to me and he said, "Look, Nick, and this was only a couple of years ago, and he said, there's something going on in my bank that I'm not particularly happy with. I have some concerns over it. I've got an email that's in my outbox, or it's about to be sent, and it's going to the CEO to raise these concerns. What do you think I should do?" And I said, "Well, look, I don't know the intricacies of the particular case. The only thing I can tell you is it's a damn sight easier to get a new job than it is to get a new reputation. So please do the right thing." And so, that's just from a personal perspective in terms of, things I didn't do correctly years ago. And it's taken me 23 years to get my reputation back. And it's not completely unclouded yet. And I don't think it ever will be, if I'm being realistic about it.
What I hear, what I get from you more than anything else is a really, really candid openness and honesty that is really uplifting, I've got to say. Not many people, okay, we know you've been stripped bare, so that has helped to kind of develop those thoughts, those feelings, that mindset. But clearly there's a very important message both for individuals, and the reason we wanted you on the show is for that reason. Is there such a thing as a question you get asked more than any other? Would it surprise us, or?
No, I suppose the most common one.
Did you do it for the money?
Well, no, I did. Well, I didn't do that for the money. I did Celebrity Big Brother for the money, but no, there was no money stolen at Barings. It was just a case of trying to survive, and surviving very, very badly, and making some really stupid decisions. You compound those with a bit of alcohol. Which is a very poor coping strategy, but it enabled me to blot out a few days and survive for another period of time. And it was just about surviving. And you look for these, the tiniest positive, and they end up being false positives that you're going to be able to turn the situation around. And ultimately it collapses like the house of cards that it was. But I suppose the questions that I often get asked, like there've been lots of funny ones over the years, but the most common one is, what was the movie like, and things like that. I have funny responses to all of those, but and they're honest as well. I mean, how they picked Ewan McGregor to play me, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the similarities come from, but it's just part and parcel of what I've had to become over the period. So, the fact that I think I'm quite transparent these days and honest and candid about what I do is there's no other way to be. If when you're in the media eye, which I was for a period of time and am again now, if you hide something away, they'll find it, so I try to do as much as I can so that, whatever the reflection is on me or whatever the perception is of me, that it's as rounded and as complete as it possibly can be. And, I suppose when you come back from prison or when I came back from prison in 1999, you've got two choices. You can run away and hide and stick your head in the sand, or you can confront it and deal with it and then move forward and use that to benefit yourself. And, I, as we've mentioned a few times, my living is made through talking, and I support my family through that method. And, whilst I don't necessarily go out and promote that I'm looking for jobs, I get afforded a very good living by it. And I'm exceptionally grateful for that, because, I was given an opportunity that not a lot of people returning from a 4.5 year or a 6.5 year prison sentence are. and I'm conscious of that.
And how was, not that we can compare the two things, but I know you've been quoted as saying, social circles, that Celebrity Big Brother in many ways, being in the house, was worse than prison. I'm sure that's not true, but what was CBB like?
It's tough. It's a tough environment. You know, what you see is what you get. I think people think that you get handed extra food during the course of the day and that your family get in to see you. It doesn't happen that way. You are locked off or closed off from humanity, bar the 12 people that you're sharing the house with for a period of 3.5 weeks. So there's no clocks. You have no idea what the time of day is. You don't see other people. So it's a very strange environment. There's some similarities with prison. You know, they do close certain parts of the house off from time to time. So you are locked in with nowhere to go, which, you know that the shutter's going to come up and you're going to get let back out into the garden eventually. But then I remember sitting in the garden and you're surrounded by 4 walls and all you see is the sky, and that's very much like prison. So you are kept away from the real world, and that, you know, there are definite similarities, and that it's tough, it's boring. There's an awful lot of time to kill. There's issues going on all the time that you have to deal with. Prison was tougher because of the extent of time. If you look at, a month in prison versus a month in the Celebrity Big Brother house, they wouldn't have dressed me up in stupid costumes. I wouldn't have had to do tasks. The food was probably slightly better in Celebrity Big Brother, but not a great deal. We did eat rice one day with tomato ketchup in it. So it's tough, because we were on a reduced budget for most of the time that I was in there.
So a couple of quick questions now before we wrap up, although I could go on chatting to you all day. But one thing we hear from lots of people, Nick, is, follow your dreams, pursue your ambition, but you've been in that position before. At what point do you get to a stage where ambition becomes potentially quite dangerous? So how do you know you've got to that kind of line in the sand, and at what point do you pull yourself back, and how do you do it?
I don't necessarily think you can define where that point in the sand is. I think that's where it becomes quite tough. So, that constant reflection, I think, is important. It's not necessarily your own reflection, but maybe your nearest and dearest need to be communicated with on that progress as well, because they're probably going to be your biggest critics in terms of whether you're extending on those boundaries and whether you are achieving exactly what you want to achieve. So there's a certain amount of self-reflection, and then your inner circle or those people close to you as well. I think as soon as it starts to impact on the stress that you're feeling within your life, I think that's an indicator that maybe you've taken on too much as well. So there are a few different things. If it's affecting your health, obviously, is another issue as well that needs to be looked at. But just taking that time out to really reflect on where you are and where you want to be.
And you've got a family now. You live in a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah.
How important is the support of your family?
My family are everything to me now. It certainly wasn't that way when I was in Singapore. So that's one of the changes that I've had to make. And I have 3 children to look after, and they whilst I travel a lot to talk, I always want to get home and spend time with them. So your focus and the things that are important in your life do change. And not that I'm encouraging everybody to immediately go and get a family so that it will change the way that they're approaching life. I think success is really, really important. And it was really important to me, and that you need ways that you can measure success by. And, it's just about scaling back how you achieve that success, or what success means to you, that becomes important within that. And genuinely, I've always done a job, thankfully, that I've enjoyed. I've only really done 2 jobs in my life, one which was in the financial services sector, and the other which was in football. Both things that I've enjoyed greatly. No 2 days are the same, but there's a lot of people out there who do a job not necessarily because they enjoy it, but because they have to provide for their family. And and that's important also. And those people to understand that they achieve success by what they do is equally important. I think we all need success. It's an important part of what we are as human beings. Just, you can't let it run away with yourself. I also, I suppose, just to finish off on that particular thing, I also had a huge fear of failure. We can't be worried about failing. People do fail, and people fail multiple times, and they pick themselves back up and they get on with stuff. But in my case, it was definitely a case of huge need for success, huge fear of failure, which meant that I didn't communicate. I was quite introvert when I worked at Bearings, but I've learned to communicate over the years, and communication for me overcomes most things in life. If you have a problem, share that problem and talk to people about what's going on, and you will get help.
Final question, if I may, and this is the question we ask to all our guests.
Sure.
I think it's fair to say, Nick, that you've got a lifetime of experience all crammed into a fairly short period of time.
Yeah.
So this is probably more pertinent a question to you than to most guests, and that is quite simple, really. And you've got kids, so if you imagine that you were giving advice to yourself now, the 15, 16-year-old version of Nick Leeson, and knowing all the things that you know now, with all those good and bad experiences, what advice succinctly would you give to yourself if you had to do it all over again?
Well, the advice is succinct, and then I'll expand on it a little bit. Always ask for help and advice. It's quite a simple one, and I've told my children that since they were 8, 9, 10 years of age. People and my children are going to face difficulties in their life, and they're going to make decisions, and they might be the wrong decisions. But I'm always there. I'm always approachable. Communicate as well as you possibly can, but always ask for help and advice. I was 25 years old. I was in a very high testosterone industry where we didn't talk about failure. I didn't ask for help and advice, and I saw it at the time. And that we're talking about the 1990s world of banking. I saw it as a sign of weakness. I should have seen it as a sign of trying to do things correctly. I was surrounded by people that could help me and could have pointed me in the right direction, and I didn't do that really, really simple thing. And it's only a case of opening your mouth and asking for help of somebody that's around you.
Fantastic. So, final question, more about you, really. People are undoubtedly going to want to find out a little bit more about you, what you're up to, where you are at any given time. How do people find out about Nick Leeson, communicate with you? You've got a website?
Yeah, there is a website. I don't own the website myself. It's just nickleeson.com. So my speaking agents look after that. I do a bit of financial trading, not advice, but we do a bit of training for far too many people are getting involved in financial markets from a retail perspective, trying to do it on their own at the moment. And I think there's a lot of misleading advertising that brings them into this particular field, be that in Instagram or Twitter or whatever. And people are getting involved in spread betting and things like that, which are exceptionally high risk, and they're getting involved with very little education or experience of the market. So we try to give them a little bit. It's all free, and come and see me at an event sometime soon.
Absolutely. Well, Nick Leeson, you've been a terrific guest. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Sandro Forte podcast, and what a great guest Nick Leeson was today. There will, of course, be another fascinating and insightful interview next week, so do make sure you join us. Sandro's podcast. Same on all channels. Please remember to share your thoughts, your ideas, experiences, and suggestions, and keep those coming. You can email me, hello@sandrospodcast.com, and please do leave a review for us on iTunes. As usual, we're keen to know what you'd like more or less of course, in the future. And if you've really enjoyed listening to one particular guest, do let us know, and we'll see if we can get them back again. Until next time, wishing you success.